You've probably seen those succulent dish gardens available for sale, and today we're going to show you how easy it is to make one yourself. They make great centerpieces for tables and great decorations for your outdoor patio, and they're pretty simple to put together. What you're going to need is some sort of container and then also some succulent plant material, obviously. Now here we've got one that's a very low profile one, which is nice. Succulents don't need a lot of root space, and so this is very shallow, but also gives you a wide surface area to plant several different succulents in it. The other thing you might want to think about is if you are looking for a centerpiece, you do want it to be a little bit shorter in profile so as to not obstruct your view from those that are sitting around you at the table. If you want to go with something that looks more like a fish bowl, the important thing to keep in mind is to make sure that it has a wide enough mouth that you can get your hand in there to plant the plants, as well as actually putting the plants in there also. Now we have some succulents here that we're going to use, and ours are little plugs. You can see that they're fairly small little plugs, but we've got quite an array of plants to choose from. We've got some hens and chicks, and then also some sedums. Now these are all hardy succulents, and there's something to keep in mind about succulents. Succulents have a kind of a thicker, coarser leaf, and that allows them to be more drought tolerant because they actually hold more moisture inside of the plant. They also have a waxier leaf, and that prevents them from losing as much moisture out of their leaves as some of your other plants. Now don't confuse succulents with cactus because they are different. Now all cactus are succulents, but not all succulents are cactus. Here we have a few other succulents, and these are tropical succulents. So we can plant these together, but we'll need to make sure our tropical ones, we do bring those in the winter time. To start out, we're going to get our container. So we're going to use this fishbowl one here, and we're going to fill it halfway with potting soil. Now you can see the potting soil that we're using is not your traditional potting soil that you might use for bedding plants. This has a lot more aggregate in it. It's very coarse. It's got some sand, it's got some chunks of clay in here, as well as just some grit. It does have our fertilizer already mixed in, and then you can see some vermiculite added in there as well, in addition to some pine bark. And this will help keep the moisture in there, but also allow for plenty of drainage, because we don't want that moisture to stay tightly up against the root ball of our new plants. So we're going to fill this up. You, of course, always want to make sure that you, in whatever container you're doing, you're not using topsoil from the garden because it tends to hold way too much moisture in a container, especially for succulents. Now that we have our container about half filled with this potting media, we're going to select the plants that we want to use. And like I said, ours are plugs here because we're working with a smaller container. A lot of these do come in 2-inch or 4-inch containers that might be more ideal, especially if you're planting a larger container. Now, this is when you have to tap into your inner artist and you get to choose, different things that you want to look for. If you wanted to go with kind of an all burgundy color, you could choose all the burgundy ones. If you wanted to go with something that has a similar texture and pattern, you could maybe use all the different various hens and chicks in this. Or if you wanted to go with something taller, you could put one of these taller ones in the center. So you can kind of play with it. I'm going to try with some of these different burgundy ones. Now, an important thing to keep in mind whenever you're pulling something out of a container that it's been growing in, you want to make sure to kind of tease those roots a little bit because they tend to get a little tangled up and bound up in there. And you can see how tightly bound these little plugs are. So we're just going to pull the bottoms off of them. And what that will do is allow those roots to start growing out into their surrounding space. So we're going to play a little bit with this. Now, because we're dealing with a more aggregate potting mix, it can be a little difficult to dig a hole for these because the gravel kind of wants to fall back in on itself. So I tend to just set them on the gravel, and then we'll come back in with more soil and plant around it. we're just going to add a little soil around each of these, trying not to bury the plant, but we do want to make sure that we're burying the root ball. Sometimes a kitchen spoon or a plastic spoon comes in handy to maneuver that soil around those root balls. You don't want to plant these too close to the side of the container. You want to make sure they have a couple of inches between each one of them so that they'll have room to grow. So we're going to tuck those in a little bit with some more soil. You just kind of want to rotate your container to make sure that you can see there's a little bit that's still exposed. You want to make sure to try to get as much of that soil off the leaves as possible. And now that we have it planted, we're just going to water it in. When we water, we want to make sure that we're getting the root ball nice and moist, especially because these are plugs. They're going to be more vulnerable to drying out than a larger pot might have been. Now, it doesn't need a lot of moisture because these are succulents. One of the nice things about a glass container is that you will be able to see how much moisture, and if you're seeing the water line in here, then you've definitely added too much moisture to this. They don't need a lot of moisture. But you will eventually start to see the roots grow through that aggregate, and that'll kind of be interesting to see the root part of a plant that we typically don't get to see. Now, the difference between this succulent glass dish and a traditional terrarium is that a traditional terrarium would have a lid to it, because usually you have ferns and things like that in there, and you want that condensation and that moisture to build up. Like I said, succulents don't necessarily want a lot of moisture on their leaves, and so when we water this, we use a nice stream of water versus a spray bottle that you might think you would use in a terrarium. We want to make sure the water's getting to the roots, not just on top of the plant. Again, because this is glass, it does not have drainage holes. So if you're somebody who's a little bit finicky about watering the correct amount, you might get a container that does have holes to allow for that drainage. And of course, if you're going to put it on your table, you want to make sure to put a saucer underneath it. Here we've used a mix of both hardy and tropical succulents, and they're going to grow just fine all summer long together, but come fall we're going to need to decide what we want to do with this. The hardy succulents, we can actually plant those out in our garden if we wanted to, and they would continue to grow for us in our garden throughout the season. And the tropical one, we're going to need to bring that in. So we could, if we wanted to, just leave it all together and bring the whole thing in the winter time, and the hardy ones would be fine as well, or we could plant them in our garden. The nice thing about planting hardy succulents out in your garden is if you decide to do this project, instead of buying plant material, you can actually just go out into your garden and dig up some of those succulents. It's a great way to feature those garden plants in a unique way. Succulent dish gardens are an easy, fun project. In addition, they make a nice, elegant, last-minute gift for anyone, for any occasion.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. You can also find even more videos on our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.